I told you you could legally walk through some of the most expensive riverfront property in Montana, even if it's owned by a billionaire, yeah, or a celebrity. And what if I told you that same law has sparked lawsuits, political controversy, and one of the most debated water cases in Montana history? Well, today we're breaking down Montana Stream Access Law, what it really says, how it actually works, and whether it truly applies to everyone, rich, famous, or otherwise. So let's get right into it. Montana has one of the strongest stream access laws in the United States. At its core, the law says that if water is capable of recreational use, then the public has a right to use it. That includes fishing, floating, wading, and simply enjoying the river. And here's the key phrase you'll hear a lot: if you can float it, you can use it. That's the foundation. But this is important. You have to have access to that water legally. You have to legally have access. You can't just cross private land to get there. You need to enter from a legal access point, like a bridge, a public fishing access, or state land. Once you're in the water, you can stay in the water. And you can use the banks up to what's called the high water mark. Now let's slow down for a minute because the details matter. First, Montana does not limit access to just navigable rivers. Now this is a big deal because in many states, if a river isn't navigable for commerce, for example, you don't have access. In Montana, it's different. If you can recreate on it, even a small stream, it's protected.
So the second thing is the ordinary high water mark. We can recreate in the bed of the river, we can float and fish, and I can walk along and even fish along the banks of the river to the ordinary high water mark, which you can see is right here. And once I get above that high water mark up here, I'm trespassing.
And third, and this is where things get complicated, the difference between a natural stream and an artificial or irrigation ditch. Because when water is heavily modified, diverted, or engineered, the question becomes, is this still a natural waterway or is it something entirely different? And that question is exactly what led to one of the most controversial cases in Montana history. Now, before we get into the controversy, let's talk about why this law exists in the first place. Montana is known worldwide for its rivers, the Bitterroot, the Big Hole, the Madison. These are not just waterways, they're part of the identity of the state. Stream access law protects that. It ensures that everyday Montanans, and not just wealthy landowners, can really enjoy those rivers, and that's the way it should be. It prevents the privatization of water. And without it, a huge portion of Montana's best fishing and recreation would effectively be locked up. So, at its core, this law is public benefit, no question about it. But here's the other side of it. Like any law, it can be abused. And when it is, it creates real problems. You'll hear stories, people crossing private land illegally, climbing fences, ignoring clearly marked boundaries, and then claiming stream access as justification. That's really not what the law says. And that kind of behavior puts real pressure on landowners and creates conflict that doesn't need to exist. Because the law works when it's respected and it breaks down when it's not. Now, not every landowner is fighting this. In fact, there are some very large landowners in Montana who handle this the right way. Now, let me give you a good example. Charles Schwab. Schwab owns thousands of acres along the Bitterroot River bottom. And by most accounts, they respect Montana's stream access laws. You know, Chuck and Helen also want others to abide by the law, and that's why you see this sign on their property on the south side, Tucker Crossing, on the banks of a portion of a braided channel of the Bitterroot. This channel is absolutely natural, and people can be on it to the high water mark. They, of course, have to allow people to use the river as the law intends. But even in those situations, there are times when that access gets pushed too far. And that's where the tension comes in, because there's a difference between legal access and taking advantage of it. Now let's bring this down to a real world example. Right here at Bell Crossing, this is a legal access point to the Bitterroot River. It crosses land associated with Hank Williams Jr. Now think about that for a second. You've got access to the river running through land tied to a major celebrity, and yet, because of Montana law, you can legally be here. That's the system working.
So we're just here on the banks of the river, the Bitterroot River, and we've come through on an access that's legal, of course, but we're actually on a celebrity's property. This is Hank Williams Jr. property. And right over here, we can see that there's parking. In fact, this white car is actually on Hank Williams Jr. property as well. So that really is trespassing, but Hank has been easy enough with it. But the actual access is just up here. And then so this is the state land, and so you can access the river at this point. But because of Montana state law, we get down here on the riverbanks, we can go all the way up here through Hank's ground as long as we stay in the high water, below the high water mark. And that's the Montana stream access law.
You enter legally, you stay within the high water marks, and respect the land. And everything functions exactly as it should. Now, let's talk about the big one, Mitchell Slough. If you spend any time in the Bitterroot, you've heard about it. This case goes back decades, and at the heart of it was one simple question. Is the Mitchell Slough a natural stream? Well, here you can see the Mitchell Slough as it meanders back and forth as it moves north to be reconnected with the Bitterroot, just a little bit south of Stevensville. Is the Mitchell Slough a natural stream, or is it an irrigation ditch? Because if it's a natural stream, the public has access. If it's an irrigation ditch, well, that's a very different situation. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Historically, there were natural side channels in that area, yes. But over time, those channels migrated and left slough areas, which would get water in them during high water from the groundwater, but were not generally connected any longer to the river itself. Irrigators along the river bottom, from roughly Tucker Crossing to nearly as far north as Stevensville, connected those paleo river bottom lows with ditches and installed the head gate, called the Tucker Head Gate, on the main channel of the river to divert river water into Mitchell Slough for irrigation purposes for those who had historical Bitterroot River water rights, and this provided a method to getting the water to them. And beyond that, you've got water coming through a much larger irrigation system, primarily the Bitterroot Irrigation District, which was established in the early 1900s. It brings water stored in Lake Como to nearly 17,000 acres along the east side of the Bitterroot below the Sapphire Mountains. In addition, water is delivered through canal systems like the Union Ditch and the Supply Ditch. So the argument for many landowners was this: without those irrigation systems and without Tucker Headgate, this slough would not function the way it does today. It behaves like an irrigation system, not a natural stream. On the other side, public access advocates argued this was a historic natural channel, and even with modifications, that original character still exists. As an interesting aside, this all got precipitated by two trespassers who used the stream access law to justify their entry to private land. I believe it was HUEY's property. So this whole thing went to the Montana Supreme Court, and the court looked at historic evidence, including maps from the 1870s. A map from 1872, to be exact. Those maps showed a side channel in roughly the same location called the right fork of the St. Mary's Fork of the Bitterroot River. And ultimately, the court ruled that the Mitchell Slough is a natural waterway, which means it's subject to public access. It means that people can go right underneath the living room over at Tony Marnell's. Now, that decision has been controversial ever since. There's a strong argument that what exists there today is heavily dependent on irrigation infrastructure, and that's why this case still gets talked about. And the issue of the Mitchell is probably not fully settled, frankly. By the way, prior to the landowners investing hundreds of thousands of dollars to make the ditch a wonderful fishery, there really was not that much interest in fishing that waterway. It was an irrigation ditch. Now, this is where the rich and famous part comes in, because some of the landowners along Mitchell Slough have included high-profile individuals, including Huey Lewis. Now, to be clear, this isn't about one person. It's about a broader question. It's called, does the law apply the same way regardless of who owns the land? And in Montana, the answer is yes, at least in the eyes of the law. Over time, stream access has always become political. There have been ongoing debates, disagreements, and criticism involving public officials, including discussions around Governor Gianforte on how access laws are or were interpreted and enforced with regard to him prior to him ascending to the governor's office. And like most things in Montana, people have strong opinions on both sides. So let's go back to the original question. Do Montana's stream access laws apply to the rich and famous? Yes, they do. But in practice, it's not always that simple, because the real issue isn't just the law itself, it's how people use it. So Montana's stream access law is one of the greatest public rights in the country. It protects access, it protects tradition, and it keeps Montana, well, Montana. But like anything valuable, it only works when people respect it. Because the moment access turns into abuse, we risk losing the very thing that makes this place special. So if you care about Montana land and water and real estate, subscribe to the Montana Real Estate channel. I'm Craig Siphers with Siphers Family Real Estate. Check out our newest video next week, or go back into our library and check out our other videos. Take a look at the communities, the price points, where we talk about real estate and things to do all over the state of Montana, things that are attached and important to Montana real estate. It's all about Montana real estate.